Well, I still see a couple people. They're still praying. We'll give a few people a minute here, and we'll get going. But here's what I was thinking about as I was praying. You know, when we were getting ready and we were preparing for this season, and we looked at the calendar, or I looked at the calendar, and decided, should we have service on Wednesday the 1st, or should we not have service on Wednesday the 1st? I knew that this wasn't going to be a record-breaking Wednesday night attendance. I was fairly confident of that. Although I don't limit God, I knew that this probably wasn't going to be this massive financial windfall that just really started the year off in some kind of strong financial position for the church. Although maybe it is. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, maybe new year, new thing. I don't know. But I felt like we were supposed to have service, and in the preparation process, I could almost believe that this service was just for me, if it weren't for the fact that I believe that God is bigger than that, and I think that you guys are going to get something. Already I thought worship was amazing. Worship was just the thing I wanted to walk through this afternoon. My wife told me that was the only reason she was coming, was for the worship. She said, the sermon is fine, but the worship is what she was here for. So, and she's in the back. She actually didn't leave. She's with Felix in the green room because he's not in class today. But here's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to look at something because this is the beginning. You know, this is the first. This is the beginning of the year. We're starting something. We're starting a year. We're starting a journey. And this weekend, we're going to kind of talk as a church family about the thing that we're believing God for this year, and the thing that I feel like God's placed on our heart for the church. And I'm really looking forward to it. But tonight, I want to talk about this concept of how we start. You know, how we start. Pastor Andrew alluded to it. I mentioned it this last weekend, you know, when I talked about how we finish things, but how we start is still important. And in preparation and praying, I felt like there's someone who we can look at, who we can see the start of something, and I think we can see a pattern. I think we can see this concept. I think we can see something, and we can familiarize ourselves with how these patterns happen, because I think we can see this, and if you've ever started something, you've maybe experienced a similar pattern. And I think sometimes God wants us to see these patterns so that we can be prepared, so that as we go through this process, we're not surprised. And so when something becomes difficult, it's not a surprise, so that we're ready when we start things. And so I want to do this. I want to take some time tonight, and we're going to be in the first chapter of Mark. And we're going to look at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, how he started his official ministry. Now, we know, of course, he was born. We know that he didn't start till he was 30. We know we have a couple stories of when he was young. But the real start of his ministry didn't start till he was 30 years old. And Mark is a good book because, if you guys know, of the four Gospels, most scholars, and of course, you know, I guess you can't know this definitively, but most scholars would agree that Mark was the first book of the Bible that was written in the New Testament. It was the first gospel that was written. And then Matthew and Luke referenced Mark. That's why sometimes they have a lot of similar stories and a lot of similar verbiage. But Mark was the first one. And if you read Mark, it's an interesting book because the first half of it deals with the life, the ministry of Jesus. And then the second half of it, you know, plus or minus, has to do with basically his road to the cross and resurrection. And Mark is like a great book to read because it's all just highlights, right? It's highlight. Like, he doesn't give a lot of detail, right? And so here's what's interesting about the book of Mark too. It's obviously the author of the book, the person who wrote it down was Mark. But most scholars believe that Mark was writing this down, and the person he was getting these stories from was Peter. That this was Peter's account of the gospel. And again, no one's going to lose or gain their salvation if that's correct or not. But that's what a lot of scholars believe. They believe this is Peter. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Peter was not a detail guy. Peter was very much, I'm just going to give you the real highlights. And if you look at some of the stories, when you read some of them, there's some interesting accounts of how Peter refers to himself in there. And so it's an interesting book. But this one is just very, very direct. It doesn't start with backstory. It just really, really gets into it. And so I want to look at this concept and see something, because I feel like we can see some patterns that we can know. And for me, I think even, like I said, even if this message and this study was just for me, I believe it's something that God is wanting me to know, and I believe you too, for this upcoming year, for things that are coming up, for something that, whether you're starting something, believing something, stopping something, I think that this is important. So we're going to just read a couple verses, and we're going to kind of unpack it a little bit. Mark chapter 1, verse 9. This is after, obviously, he's born, things are going. It says, one day, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee, and John baptized him in the Jordan River. Now, other books of the Bible give a lot of detail. They give a lot of discourse. They give a lot of stuff. They give, John, oh, behold, the Lamb of God, like all this stuff. Not Peter. Peter's like, no, I don't need any of that fluff. He went, he was baptized. Boom. Done. Next. But here's the thing that's important that we need to know. Before Jesus ever launched himself into ministry, before he began to preach, before he began to do miracles, before he did anything, he was baptized. And baptism is important for us to understand. And we talked about this a little bit during our tabernacle series, that there was this concept that before the priest, this was in the Old Testament, that the priest, before they prepared themselves for service, the priests were called to wash and the laver. They were called to wash, to prepare themselves for service to God. And this baptism, this water, this washing, this was this concept of Jesus coming and humbling himself and preparing himself for his service, preparing himself as a priest, not from the order of Aaron, but from the order of Melchizedek, to come down and to begin his priestly service. And that's why we get to hear about Jesus, who's our high priest, that he came and he lived like this perfect life and offered himself as a sacrifice. And so he comes and he's baptized. And the thing that's important that I think we need to understand is, that we can see from this, is before we start something, before we endeavor something new, before we go into something else, before we start, we need to prepare ourselves for the task. We need to prepare ourselves for what's ahead. And obviously that's going to look different, whatever it is you're starting. But we need to look at it and say, what do I need before I start, before I go to the gym for the first time, before I change my diet for the first time, before I start some new bedtime routine, or before I start a new savings plan, or before I start these things, whatever it may be, my 365 days of opening my Bible app, before I start, what do I need to do to prepare myself for the task? What do I need to do physically, mentally, spiritually to be prepared? To prepare myself for service. For Jesus, there was this concept of this ceremonial washing process, this baptism that was the preparation, this beginning to fulfill. But what are we called to do to prepare? Some people are really big preparers, some people are not. Some people are researchers, some people are not. Like I know, before I do something, I like to know. I'm also a gear person. I don't know if there's any other gear people here. I like to get into new things only because I like to buy new gear for the new thing. I just like gear. I like going and doing stuff because it's fun. I like researching gear. I like looking at it. Oh, what's the best this, that. I like doing it. Being prepared and being ready, preparing yourself for the task is important, because that is going to be one of the things that sets you up. If all of a sudden you get into it and you're not prepared and you realize that you have to go backwards and start over, or you didn't have the necessary tools, or you didn't have the necessary knowledge, you didn't have the necessary preparation, you'll go backwards. And there's this big chance that in the process of having to go backwards, due to human nature, you'll just quit. And you'll be like, same old, another year, another failure. I tried. I wasn't ready though. I wasn't ready for it. And we go backwards. And so we have to know there's preparation. And when you look at Jesus, there was even greater than just the baptism. The baptism was obviously a big thing, this monumental moment. But he lived 30 years, of which we know very little about, in preparation for 3 years of ministry. We don't know all the stories. We have a few little glimpses. We know a little bit of information. We know some of that time was spent in Egypt. We know some of that time was spent in Nazareth. We know different things. We don't know a lot, but what we know is for 30 years, Jesus prepared. For 30 years, he was ready. And so sometimes we feel like God's like, hey, I want you to start doing this. I give you this dream. I give you this vision. I want you to start this. And so we think, great, I'm going to start it right now. When sometimes we should be asking God, hey, what do I need to do to prepare to do what you're calling me to? Because when you read the Bible sometimes and we see these awesome stories of faith, you don't realize that many times decades pass between chapters. Literally decades between one instance and another. And we think, man, Abraham woke up, God told you I'm going to give you a son. Abraham went to bed, woke up the next day. Magically, his wife had a baby. And that's not how it worked. There's a lot of time in between there. We have to understand that there's this patience and this time and this preparation that happens that we need to prepare. And the preparation is what will get you set up for the task. I like to cook. I don't know if any of you like to cook. I enjoy cooking. But one of my big things about cooking is I like to prep before I cook. I like my cooking station to look like a Food Network show. Like I already like to have things pre-measured. I like to have the bowls ready. Because like when I'm executing, I don't need to be dipping stuff. I don't need to be trying to find my stuff. Like I'm ready. Like when I do it, I'm hitting it. I look like Emeril Lagasse in there. I'm just kicking it up a notch. Okay? Like I like the preparation. And so we get prepared. We prepare ourselves for the task. All right, let's keep reading. Verse 10. It says, as Jesus came up out of the water, he saw the heavens splitting apart and the Holy Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice from heaven said, you are my dearly loved Son, and you bring me great joy. The second point I think that's important, anytime we're about to start something, anytime we're about to do something new, is that we know where our affirmation, where our love, where our approval comes from. That we know where our love comes from. If we believe that our affirmation or our love or our approval or our success will come from this upcoming task or this upcoming resolution or this upcoming new venture or this upcoming job, if we believe that that is what is going to create or gain our love and affection or our affirmation, then if we fall short or if we stumble or if we miss the mark, we're going to go in a very quick downward spiral. But when we understand this, that Jesus, before he started his ministry, before he's healed these people, before he's done these things and fulfilled this, before he's made the sacrifice, before he's done any of that, God the Father says, this is my Son, and I love him. Because God loved him, not because of what he was about to do. God loved him because who he was. When we're about to start something, when we understand that our love from the Father is unconditional, that he loves me no matter what, when you know you're loved, when you know you're affirmed, you walk differently, you talk differently, you carry yourself differently, you have a different confidence that you walk with. The task is approached differently when you know that you can go out there and your success is not based on whether or not, oh man, is he going to love me? No, he loves me. He loves me. And if he's challenging me to do something new this year or to stretch myself or to take a risk, I don't have to be worried that if I fail, he's going to think of me as a failure. Because that's not how your Father thinks about you. That's not how he thinks about me. He loves us. There is a knowledge that Jesus knew before he ever went out that he was loved. and the very Spirit, he got this experience. And I know if you're like me, you're thinking, man, God, it would be easier for me to fully grasp that if maybe sometime when I got out of the bathtub, you would do the same thing to me. Like just audibly speak about me. A dove could come down, just anytime. And maybe it'll happen for you. I don't know. I can't say it won't happen. But here's the thing. When we grasp that, when we fully understand that that's the case, that that's how God sees us, that then we can know that as we start, we've already walked through preparation. We know where our love and affection and affirmation comes from. And now we're already starting from such a place of surplus. We have such a better chance of moving into success than if we thought, oh, I'm completely unprepared, and boy, if I blow this, I'm just going to lose everything. It just completely changes your mindset. It completely changes your mental property. Let's read verse 12. Right after this, again, just direct. It says, the Spirit then compelled Jesus to go into the wilderness, where he was tempted by Satan for 40 days. He went out among the wild animals, and angels took care of him. Here's something that's interesting. This kind of has an A and a B. When you're about to do something, when you step out into something new, there is usually opposition really early in the process. Really early in the process, you're going to face opposition. It is going to happen. It is both a law of nature, and it is something that the enemy knows that he can do. You will face early opposition. And this can be something in the natural. For example, maybe some of you decided, hey, this is the year that I'm going to get in the best shape of my life. And I am going to start exercising. This is it. I'm going to do it. Here's the crazy thing about exercise. If you haven't been exercising, if you haven't been working out, the first 2 weeks, your body will revolt against you. It will be the sorest. If you worked out from now until the day you died, doesn't matter how hard it gets, the most sore that you will be is the first 2 weeks. It is the worst opposition you will get through. And even knowing, we know that, we mentally know, but so many people quit because by day 4, they are so sore in every part of their body. They're just like, this opposition, I can't. And they stop. And I've done it. I've done the same thing. Like, no, I can't go on. This is it. This is leading me to the path of death, because you just think in the moment, it's not going to get any better. We don't think, well, if I keep going, it's going to get easier, because that doesn't seem to make sense, but that's how it works. But there's this opposition early. You start something, you commit to something, the enemy would love to bring opposition early. Opposition to your heart, opposition to your relationship. I mean, the minute that you, and here's the thing, it can look like this. For Jesus, it was this. We don't know this from here, because again, Peter's like, details are for girls. I don't give details. I just give you the facts. But we know from the other account that right after this, like God just said, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. When Jesus goes to the wilderness and Satan tempts Jesus and he gives those 3 different temptations, he would say, if you are the Son of God. And this was like a double statement, because one, he was questioning this concept of if you are the Son of God, but he was also leaving out the very key word, which is the beloved son. He never would even come to say, if you're the beloved, like he wouldn't say it. He wanted him to question God's love for him, and he wanted to question his position with God. He wanted to question his sonship, and he wanted to question God's love for him. And it just happened. But Jesus was a man who was tempted just like any other man. And how many times does God do something for you? Maybe you're at church on a Sunday and worship is awesome and the sermon is great. And you're like, oh, Jesus, you're so good. God's speaking to you. And you're like, oh, it's great. And you get home and your dishwasher's broken and you think that everything has abandoned you. It's over. And it just happened. Because sometimes these things we run into is our version of the enemy saying, if you're God's son. And I'm also just going to completely forget about the fact that he said he loved you. There's this opposition. There's an opposition to your dreams. When God speaks dreams to you, they're big, and when he's talking to you, they're great. But when he stops talking, you have to hold on to that. That's what faith is holding on to what God said. And so you're holding on to it, and then someone or something comes along that creates opposition. And here's the part that's hard. In your journey and your process, things are most vulnerable when they're in their infant state. We just got a new little puppy for Christmas, which I swore I'd never do. But then Vivi told me to pray about it. And I, in disobedience, did not pray about it for 2 months because I didn't want to hear God say that we were supposed to get a puppy. And then I prayed, and what do you know? He said we were supposed to get a puppy. So we have this really cute puppy. He's great. His name's Pax. I'm probably going to become that guy who walks around with a dog now. But when they're babies, doesn't matter if they're animal, human, when things are babies, when it's in the infant state, it is the most vulnerable. It needs the most help. It needs the most care. It is the easiest things. Plants are the easiest to ruin when they're tiny. It's easy to ruin something. It's easy to pull out an oak root when it just starts to sprout. You can pull that sucker out. But once that thing takes hold, you're not getting it out. But faith, our journey so many times in the beginning, when God plants a seed in your heart, when God begins to speak, when he begins to water it, it's new, it's fresh, and it requires this extra protection. But that opposition comes early. And it comes early because it wants to take away the seed that was planted. It wants to take away the identity that was spoken. It wants to take away the promise. It wants to take it away. And we hit that opposition. We hit that hardship. We hit this thing. And it's gonna happen. I can tell you, I believe that every person here has something that God is calling them into this upcoming year. And I don't believe there's a single person who won't face opposition in the process of reaching that thing. It could be small or it could be huge. But I'm telling you, no matter what it is, you will face opposition. That's why Jesus says, in this world, you will have trials and troubles and tribulations. You will have them. It's gonna happen. But take heart, because I've overcome the world. I've overcome it. I've gone over it. It's past it. You'll go through it. That's why Jesus never shielded his disciples from the trials. He never told them, hey, listen, we're going to go to the other side, but let's not take the boat. There's going to be a storm. Let's walk around. He never did that. He could have. He could have told the wind to stop before he took a nap. He could have preemptively done it, but he didn't. He made them walk through the storms. He made them go through the trials. He made them go through the tribulations. He made them go through the opposition. Why? Because that part of that opposition, even though it's hard, and even though it has the possibility or the potential of having that thing in that very small, vulnerable state ripped out, in the end, walking through that makes you stronger. In the end, going through that makes you stronger and makes you believe. In the end, those disciples had a belief that was stronger because they went through the system. They went through the trial. Verse 16, we're going to jump a couple of verses. It says, one day Jesus was walking along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he saw Simon and his brother Andrew throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. And they left their nets at once and followed him. A little further up the shore, Jesus saw Zebedee's son, James and John, in a boat repairing their nets. He called them at once, and they also followed him, leaving their father, Zebedee, in the boat with the hired men. So here's the thing about this. Once we get this thing, we walk through this preparation. We take some time when we prepare. We know where our affirmation comes from. We know that there's going to be opposition, and we walk through some seasons of opposition. We get this opportunity to invite others into our process, to invite others into what we're doing. And this can look like a lot of different things, but we can invite others just like we did tonight to say, hey, this is something I'm believing for. This is something God's calling to me. Will you pray for me? Will you help me with this? Will you hold me accountable to this? Will you just be an encouragement? Can I just tell you this? I mean, it may sound crazy. Like, we get to invite people. Sometimes it's like, hey, inviting other people to do the same thing we're doing. Sometimes you just need somebody who can invite people to do it. Sometimes just people are waiting for an invitation. And when you give an invitation, that's true, for church, that's true for working out, that's true for diet change, that's true for a job, that's true for vacation, that's true for friendship. Sometimes people are just waiting for an invitation. And if someone invites them into the process, they may never do it on their own. They may never do it on their own. But if you invite them, if I invite them, all of a sudden they do it. Guess what? If Jesus just walked by the seashore and those guys were out there, they probably would have seen him. They probably would have noticed him. But they would have never cast down their nets and followed them if Jesus didn't say, hey, you want to come with me? Okay. Now that may seem crazy to you and I. Like they just gave up their whole life. Obviously, he was pretty compelling. I feel like there was maybe more than that. Or maybe it's just it is Jesus. So that probably was something in the eyes. It's just you know what? I think I'm going to give up my whole life for this guy. Right away. But if he never asked, they would have just been like the rest of the people who just gawked. That's Jesus. That's the guy that put all the wine at the party. That's Jesus. Cool. But he invited them to the process. And here's the thing. When we invite people in the process, it's good for you because you have companionship, you have accountability, you have people who can move you. Listen, I don't know if you've ever, sometimes I use the gym because I've had successes and failures in the gym. And so it's easy. And New Year's is when a lot of people are I'm going to work out. You're much more likely to work out if you have a partner to work out with. When you have to do it alone, it takes nothing to stay in bed. Nothing. Is it raining out there? I probably shouldn't go. It's a little cold. It's cold. But when you have someone who's waiting for you, we're going to meet at this time and we're working out together, it changes things. It changes you. There's an accountability. There's this extra level when you invite someone to the process. And it can be anything you invite someone into it, even if it's just for prayer. It creates this extra level of preparation. It's this extra thing, and they start to get into it. And it's amazing how things can snowball. It's amazing how one person inviting one other person to start something, all of a sudden down the line can lead to dozens or hundreds of people starting something that they would have never started if it weren't for the fact that one person asked. If it weren't for the fact that one person said, hey, you want to do this with me? And we can do this too. That invitation is part of our church's culture code, that we invite people. We have this concept of inviting people because we believe in it. We believe in the power of invitation. We believe that inviting people makes a difference because people need to be invited to the process. They need to be invited into relationships. They need to be invited to church. They need to be. There's this invitation. So Jesus shows us that we get to invite people to join our process. Verse 21, Jesus and his companions went to the town of Capernaum. When the Sabbath day came, he went to the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching, for he taught with real authority, quite like the other teachers of religious law. Suddenly, a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an evil spirit cried out, "Why are you interfering with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come today to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus reprimanded him. "Be quiet, come out of that man," he ordered. At that, the evil spirit screamed, threw the man into a convulsion, and he came out of him. Amazement gripped the audience. They began to discuss what happened. "What sort of new teaching is this?" they asked excitedly. "It has such authority, even evil spirits obey his orders." So here's the fifth thing. When you're starting something new, how we start something, once we get to this point where we've prepared, where we know where our affirmation is, we faced opposition, we invited other people in the process, don't be surprised if what you're doing doesn't upset the status quo. Don't be surprised if this new thing that God's starting to you, whether it's in your friends or your family or your coworkers, that all of a sudden it starts upsetting the normalcy around it. And people will get upset at you. You just think you're better than us. You just think that you can do something. It will upset. It will create this ripple. Because here's what's funny: this guy from the evil spirit, Jesus didn't go and find them. This guy was in the synagogue. He was in the synagogue all the time. And guess what? He didn't care when the other people taught. When the other people taught, that guy with the evil spirit was cool. But when Jesus taught, with real authority, speaking truth, speaking the word, all of a sudden that evil spirit is like, what do you think you're doing here? This is not normal. I've been quite comfortable in this church for a long time until you showed up, and I know who you are. And all of a sudden, the status quo was messed up. When we start something, and we get through this opposition phase, and we start inviting people, we start changing people, someone or something is going to tell you, hey, you're messing everything up. This isn't how we do things around here. You can't act like that. You can't talk like that. You can't eat like that. You can't live like that. You can't do that. That's going to mess stuff up. And sometimes the people who want to hold us back the most are some of the people who are closest to us. Because if you start making yourself better, then what's their excuse? What's their excuse? They don't want you to break out of that, because if you break out of it, that means that they could break out of it, and they're quite comfortable where they're at. They don't want to get out. I unfortunately see that a lot when I get to talk to people who come from especially dysfunctional families, that there'll be one person who's trying to get their life right, they're trying to get out, and the people who are trying to hold them back the most are the people who should be cheering for them to get out the quickest. But it's the ones who don't want them out of there, because if they get out, then they have no excuse anymore. Because Jesus came to free people. Jesus came to set the captives free, and that will shake up the status quo. We see that in the New Testament later, whenever Paul was going around, and it happened to Peter too, where they kept on freeing people from evil spirits, but people were making money off those evil spirits. They were upset because their money just got messed with. It was fine whenever it was just distraction, but whenever their pocketbook got hit, all of a sudden it was a problem. Sometimes when you start something new, the status quo gets shaken up, and somebody's not going to like it. Could be strangers, or it could be someone really close. That doesn't change the fact that what you're doing is right. It doesn't change what God's put in your heart. It doesn't mean you're supposed to stop. It doesn't mean you're supposed to stop. Now, you may not have to curse them and cast out a demon. I'm not saying like, hey, the first time someone opposes your new workout regimen, like, and say in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, come out or something. We don't do that. I don't think it'd be the best result. Or maybe, I don't know. Be led, I guess. All right, last one, chapter 28. It says, the news about Jesus spread quickly throughout the entire region of Galilee. After Jesus left the synagogue with James and John, they went to Simon and Andrew's home. Now Simon's mother-in-law was sick in bed with a high fever. They told Jesus about her right away. So he went to her bedside, took her by the hand, and helped her sit up. Then the fever left her, and she prepared a meal for them. Then that evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. So Jesus healed many people who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. But because the demons knew who he was, he did not allow them to speak. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Later, Simon and the others went out to find him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone's looking for you." But Jesus replied, "We must go on to other towns as well, and I will preach to them too. This is why I came." So he traveled throughout the region of Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. So the last one I want to talk about is once we've walked through these other five, once we've walked through our preparation, once we walk through knowing that there's where our affirmation comes from, when we walk through that we know that we're going to go through opposition, and we've invited people, and we understand that we maybe have ruffled some feathers and the status quo has been adjusted, the last thing that we see is that success may draw attention. And you may say, hey, that's great. I'd love to get attention. I'd love to get some recognition for the success of this new thing. I would love for in 6 months everyone to say, wow, look what you've done over this life. Look at the success of this new thing that you've started. Look at the success. Look at the success. Look how great. But here's what's interesting. In the book of Mark especially, the crowds and the people and the success, many times when you read it, they were actually a negative to what Jesus was trying to do. And in fact, in this one, Jesus had to leave and went to isolated places, lonely places, just so he could have time to pray, to be with the Father. And he said, everyone's looking for you. You're so successful, Jesus. Everyone's looking for you. Everyone wants to know your secrets. Everyone wants you to touch them. Everyone wants you to heal them. Everyone wants to know. Everyone wants to know. Everyone wants to know. And here's the trap, especially in our human nature, that we have to learn from Jesus. And our human nature would say, oh, I'll tell you. Hey, I'll tell you how to do it. I'll tell you how to do it because I know how to do it. I know how to do it. But the thing is, you can't just go and tell someone how to do it because there were 5 other steps that had to walk through to get there. You can't just get somewhere at the end. And it may not be what they're supposed to do. So it's not that you can't be accessible, because Jesus was. It's not that you can't help people, because Jesus did. But the reality is that you understand, sometimes the attention will be the thing in the very end that has the ability to derail you from successfully finishing what God's calling you to. Sometimes it's the success of something that makes you quit. Sometimes you're so successful, and other people want to know you're so successful, you miss it. You miss the opportunity. I can't tell you how many people I know who they own a gym or they work out, they do stuff, and they don't work out because they don't have time to work out because they're too busy showing other people how to work out. I don't have time to work out for myself because I'm training clients, I'm doing this, I got the gym, I got to run this, that. And it's like, but you're the gym person. I don't have time. Sometimes success is the very thing that can derail you. Sometimes when you've got no money and you're believing, you're straining, you're working, and then all of a sudden you get a lot of money and success, and sometimes a lot of money will put you in a worse place financially than when you had no money. Because success is the problem that, like, sometimes the crowd, the people will be the thing that's your down. I can't tell you in church how many pastors and how many preachers, they were great when there was 100 people, but then all of a sudden the crowd got them. It wasn't the opposition that got them. It wasn't the hardship. It wasn't inviting people. It was the success that got them. It was the crowd that got them. But Jesus, when the crowds would get big, when our nature's like, look at this crowd, this is when we can really capitalize. This is it. This is when I can act. Like, this is how we do it. Every time in Jesus' ministry, when the crowd got too big, what did he do? He left. He left. Too big. Gotta go. Gotta go somewhere else. The crowd is trying to hold me back from my calling. The crowd, the success, the visible success that they see, because by the way, all they saw was the visible success. They couldn't see the heart. Jesus was really interested in healing people, but more than that, he was really interested in fulfilling the call and the heart that God had given him. They didn't see that. They didn't know he was marching to death. They just thought it was cool that he was healing people, casting out demons. It was cool, and it was. But when Jesus was like, the crowd, the success, oh man, all this stuff, he said, hey, we got to go. We got to go. Not because he didn't love people, not because he didn't want to help people, but because he knew the way to maximize what he was called to be able to start and to be successful. And the thing that God had called him to was that he couldn't allow the success be the thing that led him to failure. And so many times in human life, in our life, success is the thing that derails us the quickest. And so, as we wrap up tonight, it's just quick, it's just short, it's just this thing. As we start, I want you to think about those 6 things. What do you need to do to prepare for the task? Know where your affirmation, your love, your affection, your acceptance comes from. Know that when you start, there's going to be opposition. And it probably will start early. Maybe as soon as you decide to start. Invite others to join the process. Don't be surprised if you shake things up, if you offend people, if the status quo is messed up. And if your success draws attention, make sure you stay focused and grounded in the mission that God has called you to. Father God, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the pattern and the process that we can see in the life of your son. Lord, I just thank you and I just speak by faith that 2020 will be a year that when we get to look back upon it, it will be filled with occurrences and occasions where we can see the goodness of God, where we can see your touch, your hand at work in our lives. We're just so thankful for who you are. We're thankful for what you're doing in this church, in our church families' lives. Lord, I believe that we're going to see financial prosperity, healing, relationships. We're going to see new vision, new life because of who you are. And as we start, we're going to walk in the process that you have for us. It's in your holy name we pray. Amen and amen. Listen, church, we love you. Don't miss this weekend. It is going to be awesome. Happy New Year, and we'll see you this Sunday. Have a great night.